And there's a sort of sub-theme that's been laced throughout the discussions yesterday and this morning. It was in Angela Glover Blackwell's comments about equity. It was something Eduardo Porter raised about employment practices. And this issue of addressing on the one hand, the workforce needs, and on the other hand, the opportunities for livelihood and advancements is such an important aspect of the way that companies create shared value. And that's what we're going to begin to turn toward this morning. And it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Helene Gayle. Helene has served for 10 years as the CEO of CARE, and then more recently, in the last year, has taken on the role of the inaugural CEO of the McKinsey Social Initiative, which is a new effort launched by McKinsey to try and pursue multi-stakeholder solutions to complex problems, including those related to workforce and employment. And I'm also very proud to say that Helene serves as a board member of FSG and has been an important guide and inspiration for us along our journey. So Helene, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks to this last panel and the other panel. After hearing this incredible, rich discussion, I would like to just kind of say ditto and take my seat and let the rest of the proceedings go on. But since I was asked to make a few comments, I will take a few moments and really address this issue of multi-stakeholder partners and why it makes a difference, how it makes a difference, and what are some of the challenges. And Mark gave a little bit of my career trajectory, and I'll just say a few things. Sometimes I think about myself and my career as being an example of what we're talking about. I started my career as a public health physician in the government, working with Centers for Disease Control, then went to private philanthropy with the Gates Foundation, then went on to lead a large international not-for-profit, and now working with a private business, looking at how to use the assets of that company to create social change. So, I'm kind of a roving, multi-sectoral career in one. And so it's given me a chance to step back a little bit and think about what does it mean to bring these different stakeholders together, and, why do we do it? And first starting with some of the whys, and obviously, we're all in this room because we do believe that somehow there's greater value in all of us working together. But I think we also are all here because we recognize while there's great conceptual wisdom in that, there's also some very hard realities. So let me try to see about exploring some of those, and maybe, again, start a little bit with the why. So I'm kind of a simple-minded person, so I think about it in a somewhat simple-minded way. If we think about creating social change, and the real goal of that is to improve people's lives, people don't live their lives in sectors, and problems weren't created in sectors. And if we think about any problem, it clearly is caused by the failure of multiple sectors. So if we think about anything from poor health that the last panel talked about, to income inequality, poverty, climate change, any of these things are clearly systems failures, but of multiple systems. And while we often try to address those in one sector, and one sector can have a ripple effect on another, if we're not thinking about how to do this from the very beginning in a multi-sectoral way, we won't get the kinds of solutions that we need. And so if we want to make a difference, oftentimes we think about social problems being the purview of the social sector and leaving things there. But clearly, if we do that, we're not going to have the kind of actual change that we want and the kind of problem solving that goes into creating large problems. So for instance, when I was at the Gates Foundation, we talked a lot about this three-legged stool of social change, with the idea that each leg provides key support, and if one leg breaks, then the stool will fall. you know, a lot of people, and we've used a lot of the different terms, you know, some people talk about the golden triangle, or we talk about shared value or conscious capitalism. But I think when it all adds up, we're talking about how do we bring these different actors to the table. And if you put it simply, and thinking about what the assets each of them bring, the private sector is known for innovation and being nimble and knows how to get things done, but companies have to profit to survive and they don't pursue social goals. Gross generalization, but characterization. The public sector is responsible for the welfare of all people and has experience operating complex programs at a massive scale, but they get smothered in bureaucracy and are slow to innovate. The social sector can sometimes combine innovation and nimbleness with a social purpose, but tends to have experiences in the places and with the populations where we want to have an impact, but often lack resources for scale and sustainability. And so we see a lot of great pilots that never end up making the kind of impact that we want. The dream is obviously to be able to mix all of those and match the features of these sectors deftly enough to build a powerful force for social change with all of the combined strengths and none of the weaknesses. Okay, that's a dream, not easy to make happen. But does it work sometimes? Well, yes and no. Let me give some examples of some of the successful efforts in creating this kind of change. And I think the kinds of examples that people have talked about and we're starting to see more often. So I'll give some examples from some of my own experiences. One that I'm now personally involved in is the Generation program that's being launched under this umbrella of the McKinsey Social Initiative. It's looking at a problem that we're going to talk about more in another session, this problem of youth unemployment. But it intentionally started by looking at it from the two sides of the coin. So first of all, you have the 75 million young people who are unemployed and 200 million underemployed. And then we also have employers who say they can't find enough qualified people for entry-level positions. So from the beginning, we tried to not look at this as just youth or just employers, but how do you think about the needs on both sides? Last year, when we started this program, we started it with the idea of launching it in 5 countries. It's now launched in 5 countries, both here in the United States, Mexico, Spain, India, and Kenya. And it's focused on the needs of both. So we work closely in the beginning with over 100 private sector employers to understand what they were looking for, and then design programs to meet the needs of young people, not just looking at skills, but also looking at what are the behavioral aspects that are important in a workplace, and how do you make sure that they have the right social support and mentoring opportunities. And then embedded in that, a very rigorous design of measuring impact to be able to show the return on investment by having this kind of multi-stakeholder approach from the very beginning. Or also working with the public sector and making sure that in the municipalities in which we work, that what we're doing and how it's aligning with the industries that we're working on actually help to meet some of their goals, their stated goals around youth and employment. So we're also using providers from the social sector like community colleges, not-for-profit training organizations, et cetera, to set up a model that can be scaled, replicated, and sustained over time with the investment of private sector capital. We did this knowing that no single business could justify the expense of standing up a research-based youth employment program that really was able to show return on investment, but that once this program was up and running and could be a shared benefit to all, that then private sector would be willing and could justify an investment in a program to meet its needs. The results so far have been incredible and very successful, but I think what really is important is how we've been able to bring this program to scale very rapidly. So by the close of this first quarter of 2016, we'd increased our student volume by over 50% while still maintaining a 90% employment rate. Our pace of launching cohorts is 10 times faster now relative to what it was a year ago, And we've been able to obtain employer commitments in India and Kenya to pay for 30% of the program operating costs, so moving this program towards sustainability. So just one example. But let me give a couple of others. When I look back at my years of working at CARE, one of the things that I felt we were able to accomplish most successfully over that period of time was to develop new kinds of partnerships with a large NGO working with the private sector. So an example, in agriculture. We know that agriculture is the backbone of the economy in Africa, yet the trend of rapid urbanization and limited economic opportunities for young people who are clearly becoming the majority population meant that we had large rural communities where farming is done being hollowed out as young people leave to seek better opportunities in the city. We know that in West Africa, cocoa, which happens to be the base of the staple food for many people in our diets, chocolate, has been really affected by these demographic shifts. And so, for example, in Ghana, the average age of a cocoa farmer is 56, in a country where the life expectancy is 62 years of age. So not a good formula when you think about economic development and a very important agricultural commodity. This is clearly a challenge for companies that source cocoa, but CARE was able to work with Cargill to turn this into an opportunity for both the company as well as cocoa farmers. Our partnership worked with over 5,000 cocoa farmers in 7 countries to achieve a variety of goals: grow more and better food crops that were able to fight hunger and malnutrition, improve village schools, and at the same time increase the quality of the cocoa crop. So farmers got a guaranteed market for their cocoa and cocoa supply, healthier communities, and a more enticing economic opportunities for young people, meaning more of them stayed in the rural areas, looked at farming as a future opportunity, economic opportunity, and created a win-win situation. But as was noted in the previous panel, this didn't happen without challenges. So for instance, a business like Cargill is used to moving at great speed. An NGO like CARE is used to working slowly with the process of engaging communities, which takes a long time. We had to learn to understand how to work together, and only with a commitment to a long-term partnership are you able to weather those storms and get to the point where you're able to understand how to work together better. I could go through lots of other examples, but those are just a couple. I have worked over the years with Coca-Cola in its 5x20 program that has multiple stakeholders around the world. UNHCR worked closely with the tech community, with Google, that was able to help to build a website so new refugees were able to find efficiently affordable places to live in the context of the refugee situation, and on and on and on. I could go on about these kinds of partnerships that I think we're starting to talk about more and more in this room that show that we do have examples of how we can work together. But why are there not more partnerships like this? And what is it that we're going to need to do to be able to encourage more of these kind of cross-sector collaborations? First, I think we've got to get past our preconceived notions about the sectors and start to learn to speak a common language. If we think that business is greedy, that government is incompetent, and social sector organizations are hopelessly idealistic, we're going to be unlikely to find a common pathway or even want to work together. Now take the accusation of greed that's leveled at businesses. You can find evidence to support it if you're looking for it. So for example, only 5% of humanitarian appeals in 2014 were met by private companies. But if you're curious why that number is so low, instead of just being smug about businesses' obsession with profit, let's look at a few quotes from business people around that situation. So one businessman wrote, he assumed that an amorphous device called the international community would come to the rescue. So simply some education around that could have been helpful. He also said that he decided that had he decided to get involved, he had no idea where to start because of the cacophony of aid organizations competing for resources who tend to persuade businesses that there is no clear path forward for impact. And finally, nobody was coming to him with a pitch in his own language about value proposition. So a simple shift from donating to people in need to investing in resilient communities might have been a way of making business understand what the opportunity was. Or as I'm reminded of a business partner in the financial community who said, if you could stop talking about 1 billion people who need financial inclusion and start talking about 1 billion potential customers, my partners will understand the imperative for working on financial inclusion. But let's be real, these preconceptions didn't come out of nowhere. We all know that there are businesses that have done bad things to people and our planet. We also know that there are a lot of governments that are inefficient and don't act in the interest of their people. And we know that there are civil society actors that just think that by doing good deeds and not showing that they can actually have impact is enough. But I think we are also seeing that as we look at the landscape, there are more and more businesses that are moving beyond just this kind of arm's length CSR to this new paradigm that we're all talking about here, where we can use the economic value creation to also create social value, and that social value and economic value don't have to be mutually exclusive. We also see social sector organizations that are looking for filling gaps that businesses that can help with that are more than just handing over a check. They're the kinds of examples that were given in the previous panel where populations can be helped by the business skills that can be shared, or that the needs of populations can help to produce new products that might fill an important social need. And we also need businesses that are willing to use their influential voices to speak about policies that could also affect social change. So we know there's lots of roles where businesses, social sector actors can move together in different ways. Obviously, there's many challenges that remain, and I think the two that stand out in my mind that have come up over and over again are aligning incentives and having better metrics. I think we know that if we continue to have misaligned incentives, particularly if we think about the case of businesses, short-term financial gains, or cash-starved social sector actors that look at the private sector as only financial resources, not thinking about these complementary skills and multiplying impacts that come. If we're not thinking about how we align the incentives and develop the kind of metrics that hold us accountable for moving towards a different kind of social outcome, we're not going to have these kind of partnerships in the end. And I think we're going to continue to have the misalignment and continue to think about our efforts as mutually exclusive and not mutually aligned. So let me just stop by drawing a few lessons from history. And I think if we think historically and look at the way change has happened, we'll see that it's always been multi-sectoral approaches that have been necessary to create great social change. If we take the civil rights movement, for instance, while we think about civic leaders like Martin Luther King or civil organizations like the NAACP, SCLC, or SNCC, it was also with the involvement of the public sector, government, changing policies that struck down discrimination and segregation, or private sector putting pressure on private sector companies like Woolworths with sit-ins, or Welch's with great boycotts to end discrimination and then promote fairness and justice in the business world. It took all of these sectors to coming together to make a great social movement move forward, like civil rights, or today as we look up and see what is the example of civil society, government, and the private sector coming together to fight unfair discriminatory laws in states like North Carolina. We know that great social change doesn't happen without all sectors coming together and working together. So I have no doubt that we as a community can come together, continue to demonstrate, show examples of what works and why it matters. And I think if we're trying to design big and have successful social change initiatives that will carry us into the future, like so many people have talked about, we have to draw on some of these lessons of how social change has really happened in this world. I grew up in a world of movements, the civil rights movements, the women's movement, African liberation struggles, et cetera. I believe in the power of social movements. And so I think if all of us think of ourselves as being at the cusp of creating an important social movement, I hope that will inspire us to think beyond our sectors, beyond our walls, think about how to align our incentives and move forward to really change the face of our world and our ability to solve great social problems. So thank you.